Namaskar viewers, hello and welcome to Sansad TV. I am Tina Jha, you're watching Perspective. India has been pressing for resolving the Ukraine conflict through diplomacy and dialogue, and it is ready to contribute to any peace process. Prime Minister Narendra Modi said this on Saturday after holding wide-ranging talks with visiting German Chancellor Olaf Scholz. The German Chancellor is on a two-day visit to India. Prior to meeting Prime Minister Modi, he was accorded a ceremonial reception at the Rashtrapati Bhawan this morning. This is his first visit to India since taking over as the German Chancellor in 2021. Now, during talks with the Prime Minister, the German Chancellor called the Russia-Ukraine war a major catastrophe, expressing hope that the G20 under India's presidency will address the global implications of the war that has now entered its second year. On the bilateral front, extensive discussions took place on important issues of mutual interest. What are some of the significant issues that came up during the India-Germany summit, and also the agreements that were concluded between both sides? That and much more in perspective today with three eminent guests who are joining me on the program virtually. Pleased to welcome former Ambassador Mr. Gurjeet Singh, Mr. Alok Bansal, Director, India Foundation, and Ms. Aditi Bhaduri, Founding Editor, International Affairs Review. Thank you to all my guests for joining me on the program today. Ambassador, to you first, how substantive is this visit of the German Chancellor, his first to India since he assumed office back in 2021? And in context of the bilateral relationship, what is the kind of progress that you see in our relationship following today's meeting?
Oh, thank you, Tina. It's a very significant visit. Chancellor Scholz, as the mayor of Hamburg, had visited India in 2012. When I used to meet him in Hamburg, he also always recalled that visit with great fondness. Since he became Chancellor, he has done something unique. He has visited India bilaterally without having an intergovernmental consultation. So this is that big joint commission at the level of the summit, which we hold biennially. And at one time, the Prime Minister goes and then the German Chancellor. So the turn of the German Chancellor, as per the IGC, was next year. And this year, in any case, he was going to come for the G20 summit. Yet he found time to schedule a visit to India almost at the stroke of the annual marking of the Ukraine crisis, which means that he has got something up his sleeve. And I think what he has is the recognition of the fact that India is a stabilizing force which could create diplomatic space in the current international tone. Secondly, I think he sees India as a most important cog in the German Indo-Pacific policy for defense, for economic, and for climate issues. I would stop there and I would like to elaborate on these.
Sure, we'll understand more from you on the commitment that the German Chancellor has made in the Indo-Pacific and the increasing role of Germany in this particular region. But Mr. Bansal, leaving aside the Russia-Ukraine discussions that took place and the kind of statements that we saw from both sides, bilaterally, what are the significant takeaways for you from the summit today?
See, I feel it will take forward the India-EU free trade area agreement, which has actually been pending for a long period.
Right.
And Germany is the largest economy in European Union, is a very, very powerful country, and I think will play a major role. He said that he will take it forward. So I think if we have played our cards together, this FTA, which has been hanging fire for a very long period, should come through, and it will be a big achievement as and when it comes through. I think his visit, first by him, because he's leading, as you know, a traffic light coalition with Greens and FPD. So he has policy restrictions as far as reaching out to India is concerned, though all three political parties are favorably inclined towards India. I think one thing which I perceive, and I would like to take it on from where Ambassador Gurjeet left, I think German Chancellor wants India to mediate now in this conflict, because this conflict has reached a stage. It's not going to end unless, of course, there is a third party arbitration. Right. Because both the sides, that is Russia and Ukraine, have assumed hyper-nationalistic narratives. And in that sort of a scenario, the conflict is not ending. Ukraine is being supplied by the West, so it's not going to back down. And Russia, Putin has taken an aggressive foreign policy posture. So I think India is one of the few countries that has the capacity to mediate between the two warring sides. And I think of late, there has been some statements coming from Indian establishment saying that they are willing to do so. So maybe Germany, I think, wants, because within the European nations, Germany is the one of the few big countries which is most affected by the Russia-Ukraine war.
Right.
They are the ones who are actually getting a significant amount of energy resources from this particular part. Unlike UK, etc., who are not so dependent on this particular issue.
You know, that's quite interesting. You're right. We heard the External Affairs Minister a few days ago. We heard the Prime Minister today saying how India is willing and ready to actually work towards a peace process to end the war. So whether at the diplomatic level we're already engaged in some kind of mediation is something that I'll come back to Ambassador Singh and understand from him. But Ms. Bhaduri, if I could take the same question from you. Given the timing of the German Chancellor's visit to India, it was evident and it was understood that Russia-Ukraine conflict would figure prominently in the discussions. Looking at the statements now coming in from the German Chancellor, the kind of hope that he has expressed under India's presidency, G20 actually looking to address some of these global problems as a result of the war. From 1 year ago when the conflict started to now, do you see a change in the stance of Germany? India is where it was. India has always been in favor of dialogue, diplomacy, peace. So we stand where we were. But do you see a change in stance of Germany as far as India's stand on the Russia-Ukraine conflict is concerned?
Well, there has been a change, but I would like to say that it seems to be a forced change. Germany has been kind of pressured because it held out for the longest. It was one of the countries that was most reluctant to kind of have a military intervention or support to Ukraine. And it held out for a very, very long time. It's only recently in January that it actually committed to sending in its Leopard 2 tanks. It was holding out and it's continued to buy Russian gas. But then Russia seized these imports out because of the sanctions. So while, yes, there is a change in Germany's stance, it's kind of a reluctant change, which I would, which it seems that it has been under pressure, and because it has also kind of, linked up sending the tanks to only if the US also would commit to sending in the Abrams tanks. So it's been a long time in coming. Yesterday at the UNGA, again, the German foreign minister and clashed with the Chinese representative over the Ukraine issue, saying that it's time for these countries to make a stance. So there is a change, but then as the previous speaker, Mr. Bansal said, that Germany is one of those who have been the most affected in Europe. Because of this crisis. So it would definitely like to see it end as soon as possible. And I definitely do see a role for India. I mean, I had written about it a long time ago, that India today is one of the few countries which can talk to, people on both sides of the divide. And this is not just in Europe, in other parts of the world too. And given its G20 presidency, this is something definitely on the table. Yes.
Ambassador, a lot is being talked about how India, and it has been actually over the last 1 year or so, how India can play a prominent role in sort of, a mediation process in halting the war, because it's been 1 year and no end in sight to what actually the end of the war will be. So the question here is, of course, on the increasing recognition of India's stance. I remember and I recall how in the initial days of the war, there was a lot of criticism about where India stands. Now there is more and more recognition about India's independence and neutral stance, and sort of expectations now growing from India to help end this war.
Indeed, I think from the criticism to the acceptance and now perhaps the appreciation. It is because of that appreciation, I think Chancellor Scholz says, that basically somebody needs to talk to both sides. But I would not from that jump into the conclusion that we are going to be mediators very soon. mediation requires a set of circumstances which I believe are not attained yet.
Right.
Other efforts by Israel, for instance, have led to kind of an agreement, but then it gets sabotaged by other players who are active in the thing. So I think it is, my mind, what Germany is trying to do with India is create more diplomatic space and reduce the military action. That's about it. And in that, they believe that German and consequently European strategic autonomy could come back, which has taken a serious hit thanks to American intransigence on this issue. But to my mind, that is an appreciation of India. I think the more important things are that almost $1 billion from the 10 billion promised last year for the sustainability and development partnership are ready for dispersal, and projects have been signed in November. I think that is extremely positive. I think the agreement that was signed in May last year at the level of foreign ministers on trilateral cooperation in other developing countries, that is now moving with projects in 5 countries, 4 in Africa, 1 in Latin America, and perhaps more. There is a new vision for innovation and technology partnership, which was enunciated today. But I think the most significant part are 3. First, there was a lot of talk about the order of aeroplanes with Boeing and Airbus. But somewhere the narrative did not mention that a large amount of the Airbus planes are also manufactured in Germany. Second, Germany has signed recently through a company a massive contract for 1,100 locomotives to revamp the Indian railways with technology, upskilling their workers. This is massive, 26,000 crore entirely made in India. And yet the Germans are not very good at speaking up about what they do, and it doesn't get covered in the media. And the third thing I believe, and looking at the list of the CEOs who accompanied the Chancellor, I noticed ThyssenKrupp, which was one of the contenders for the submarine project, is now revived its interest in having a strategic cooperation with India on submarines. Now, these specifics that I mentioned are actually implementing the German Indo-Pacific policy.
Right. Mr. Bansal, Ambassador spoke about the vision of innovation and technology. Now, we are all aware how India today is, witnessing a rapid phase of growth and transformation. Do we see that converging, the innovation partnership and the green partnership that we are engaged in with Germany? Does that synergize with India's growth ambitions? We are now the 5th largest. By the end of the decade, we are projected to be perhaps the 3rd largest. So does it also converge with our growth story?
See, undoubtedly, firstly, India's focus as far as technological prowess is concerned is in the field of green technology. We are also working on Atmanirbhar Bharat. Right. And I think both in green technology, Solar Alliance, that is where I think collaboration, there are enormous scope for collaboration between the two countries. German Chancellor also talked about huge technical manpower that's available in India. And unlike in the past, today we have a large number of Indians working even in Germany. So I think in days to come, you will see that Indian diaspora in Germany will be as powerful as it has been in US. Though it will take a number of years, but we can see a large number of technical manpower today in Germany as well. In most big companies, you will find you have now Indians working in those companies as well. And I think as far as India is concerned, our main focus has been on green technology, and I think there is enormous scope for collaboration. Ambassador also talked about submarine project. I think this is another pet project of Prime Minister Modi, where he has been talking of Atmanirbharta in the field of defense. Right. And I think this is where I think a collaborative venture which sets up a production facility in India needs to be considered in the long term. But above everything else, I still feel that one of the main intent of German Chancellor's visit to India at this point of time would be to cajole India to move away from its conservative foreign policy and take an aggressive stance to mediate between the warring parties. And I think that time has come. If India has to assume its rightful place in the Committee of Nations, and if we actually think that we have to be a global power, a time has come when we need to revert back to Nehruvian foreign policy, where we were mediating in conflicts in Vietnam and Korea. I think a time has come where we need to mediate between Russia and Ukraine, because this conflict is affecting us also. It may not be affecting us as much as it is affecting Germany, but this particular conflict is making by each day Russia more and more dependent on China. And the Russo-Chinese axis is extremely, extremely dangerous for us. And I think that is what we need to avoid. So I think there is a convergence of interests as far as India and Germany is concerned, as far as to stop this conflict. I understand Israel and Turkey did take initiatives. There are powers in the Western world which do not want this conflict to end because they have their vested interests. But I think India is a much bigger power. And if required, India can take some other countries with it to create a coalition of nations which mediates as far as this particular conflict is concerned. Because as far as I see it, this conflict will not end by itself. It would require an external intervention to end this conflict, which will entail a ceasefire followed by negotiations.
You're right, Ambassador. The fact that, it was the first anniversary of the Russia-Ukraine war on the 24th, and given the rhetoric, the statements from both sides, it seems both sides are now more and more entrenched to continue to fight towards victory. So until there is an external force which tries to mediate, and as Mr. Bansal was saying, what do you make of that? How can India avoid the growing Russia-China nexus, number one, because it threatens us also majorly? The second part of the question is, how better is India placed today to actually navigate in a way with both countries so that there is at least some resolution, some breakthrough to this never-ending war and the kind of stalemate that we're witnessing today? Ambassador?
Well, I am a little timid when it comes to advocating mediation unless the ground is ready. So I don't see that happening. I think our limited vision is to expand the space, as I said, make sure that the G20 is not derailed by big power rivals. There, we have to keep playing a role, keeping the interests aligned. And if that creates the diplomatic space for negotiations to start, it's the best way forward. Secondly, you asked about the China-Russia. India has resisted the temptation to become a China-Russia-India axis against the G7. We have actually kept very well into the center, and we realized that it is not Russia, but it is China which is the bigger threat. Now, this is not shared by everybody, but it is something that we remain cognizant of. So how do we make sure that Russia and China do not come together to our detriment? The one, I think Russia understands that by India resisting pressure and continuing to buy larger quantities of Russian oil is a support to them. Russia is also looking to evade sanctions by dealing with India directly on issues of trade. And I think these economic factors will perhaps keep Russia a little more balanced. But if you look back even a decade, in the Indo-Pacific, Russia has just followed China, just like Europe today follows United States on the issue of Ukraine. So this Russian kowtowing to China is not of recent origin. We just need to make sure that it doesn't get out of hand. But I have no other specific magic mantra to keep them, because they are deeply dependent on other countries bailing them out economically.
But the fact that they have navigated well during the last 1 year, given the dependency they had on Russia, Ms. Bhadouri, coming back to Germany's interest and engagement in the Indo-Pacific region. So what purpose and how beneficial is this going to be for India's stance? We advocate for a free, open and inclusive Indo-Pacific. Two parts to the same question. Why this, increasing interest of Germany in the Indo-Pacific region now? Is it only symbolic? Or if they engage militarily also in the region, does it affect India's position of free, open and inclusive Indo-Pacific? Ms. Aditi Bhaduri?
Yes. Well, no, I don't think it contradicts Germany's engagement with the Indo-Pacific contradicts India's position or interest. It is actually for Germany to veer itself away from its huge dependency also on China. And that is why, Germany is also pursuing its own interests and India is, one of the major alternatives that can be offered to Germany for diversifying its economic dependence away from China. China is Germany's largest trading partner. And just last year, remember, before coming to India as Chancellor, Chancellor Olaf visited China last year in November. And it was much against the wishes of his European counterparts. And it pledged about $20 billion in new investments just in 1922, just last year, which is already after the outbreak of the war. So it is Germany's interest and it finds India to be a promising partner. And so it has had port calls. It has sent its naval fleet in the Indo-Pacific. It has paid a visit to India also. So I don't see because Germany's stance, it differs from. It's not like it's the U.S. and it talks about Taiwan when the Chancellor Olaf was in China. They talked about any changes to Taiwan's status should be by mutual agreement and things. So Germany is playing it's not a more careful role.
Right.
And this is its latest. It is a late entrant to the Indo-Pacific, and it sees in India a viable partner as an alternative to China, which fits in very well also with India's need for investments, with India's need for technology transfer, with India's need for Atmanirbhar Bharat and Make in India and Digital India. So yes, there is a synergy, there is a convergence. How far it will go, it will take time, I suppose.
Absolutely, you're right. Ambassador, I'll take one last question from you. And this relates to the long pending FTA. Olaf Scholz has expressed his commitment. Apart from his interest and engagement in the Indo-Pacific, he says that he's going to play an important role in early finalization of the FTA, also the long pending investment pact between India and the EU. As someone who's served as an ambassador to Germany and has seen the kind of progress that we've seen in our bilateral relationship, help us and our viewers understand what really are the sticking points to the FTA and by how soon will we be able to, make it a reality?
Actually, when he said that at the press conference and I heard him, I actually smiled. I said, oh man, this is changing. Because when I was in Germany, the Germans were always very interested in the India-EU BTIA, as it was then called. But they did precious little with Brussels to push them to complete. Now that the process has become more political, when Mr. Piyush Goyal and the Prime Minister Modi had the summit earlier, the India-EU BTIA has been split into 3 agreements, and now there is a political level push. But at the real level, things are still not coming together. There are still too many differences. And I think this is because India's big push for IT services lost its importance because Indian IT companies all invested in Europe to abide by their rules rather than wait for a never-ending FTA. So who is pushing on the Indian side? It is the traditional exporters who have lost their GST. Economic sense is not really there. It is really the investment and the mobility, which are the two critical parts for India, both with the EU and the UK, and these have sticking points. Now, on both these points, Germany has a very positive approach to India, both on mobility and investment. And therefore, if they speak loudly in Brussels, they will be able to nudge the process.
Mr. Bansal, in our conversation about trade, investment, defense and security in Indo-Pacific, we forgot the thrust that India has been making on reforming the multilateral institutions. Today, again, we heard the Prime Minister speak about how it is the need of the hour to reform the multilateral institutions to, ensure that the 21st century realities are reflective. Where does Germany stand on this?
See, when you talk of reforming the multilateral organizations, the first thing that comes to mind is United Nations Security Council reforms. And India and Germany were on the same page as far as reforms were concerned. We made a concerted bid for enlargement of the Security Council. And I think both India and Germany are ideal candidates for getting into this UNSC. There is a need for, of course, reforming the financial institutions, global financial institutions, make them more representatives of the current realities. And I think we would need support of countries like Germany if we have to actually push our agenda on reforming the multilateral agencies and multilateral institutions in times to come.
You're right, and especially when the Prime Minister brings the focus on how countries must work together towards the issue of unsustainable debt, it's important that we get support from these like-minded countries. So that having been said, we'll have to wind up the program. Thank you, Ambassador Singh, Mr. Bansal and Ms. Aditi Bhaduri for joining us on this edition of Perspective, sharing your thoughts, your views with us and our viewers. And to you viewers, thank you very much for your time as well. I'll see you same time on Monday now. Take good care of yourselves. Have a good weekend.